Morning, church. Kingdom kids. Kids are more than welcome to go learn their lesson. They probably wouldn't want to sit in here for this one today anyway. If you are like me, and perhaps this is a young man's game by any measure, I have with me today a few books that I hold near and dear to my heart, not as high as Scripture, but they're near and dear to my heart. I have some comic books, and I have a book, and it's a thick one, Star Wars. It's a thick one. I enjoy fantasy, sci-fi. A lot of us do, right? There's a reason why those movies typically tend to be the blockbuster hits. We like getting away from reality, right? Even if it's just for a few hours, a few days a week, right? Sit down in a book, read one chapter. It's away from reality. It's a new life, new people, new problems. And we don't mind their problems because they're not our problems, right? You can look at the problem and analyze it and say, well, this is what I would do in that situation. Well, that's a lot easier than actually being part of the problem. Well, what we're going to talk about today is a push away from reality. And the reason why this has become so hot topic, so high button, is because we are more and more as a society trying to get away from reality. Sometimes that is in a good measure, right? Please sit down at night and read a good book, right? It is a good drive to get away from reality for some time. Yet, in truth and in the things of godliness and righteousness, this is where we must accept and come to reality. Is it not a reality that Jesus Christ died, was buried, and resurrected? Yeah, that's the reality. Now, most people don't want to accept that reality in our time and in our age, but that is reality. We have the truth of the Scriptures here before us to show us that reality. Today we're going to be talking about the hot button topic, continuing talking about LGBTQ topics, namely that of transgenderism. And this, as you know, quickly flip on anything, has become one of the most hot button topics that there is. Well, the title of my sermon today is LGBTQ plus, Social Contagion, and the Future. Number one, what I want to discuss with you, and most of you, I hope in this room, agree with me on this topic, and if you don't, I hope to persuade you towards this side of thinking, is that this is obviously wrong. The idea of a transition from one gender to another is not prescribed, not only by Scripture, but obviously by the way that we're made. Very obviously. And I want to discuss that with you first and foremost. Why is this so wrong? There was a study done back in 1979, and I want to give you exactly what the doctor said. Among the reasons for exercising extreme care in giving hormone therapy, according to Dr. Eilenfield, is the fact that 80% of the patients who want to change their sex, this is what he said, shouldn't do it. And here's his quote: "There is too much unhappiness among people who have had the surgery and partaken in hormone therapy." They didn't actually feel any better at the end of it, right? They may have felt more comfortable in the form and the fashion that they were taking, but it wasn't as if overwhelming happiness and all the problems of the world disappeared. Every single problem was still there. It's not as if magic land appeared and boop, everything is better for me. Too many of them end as suicides. The transsexual candidate, he added, has been described as the only patient who diagnose themselves and prescribe their own treatment. Now, he said that in 1979, Dr. Eilenfield. That's not true anymore. We quite do the opposite now. Now we affirm it, and now everybody else tries to prescribe it onto them. The difference between a few decades and where we've come into this. Folks, here's the reality of it, and we know this by nature, and without getting too graphic, but we know this by nature. There are men and there are women. Now, growing up, I knew that. Most people growing up today don't know that. They don't know that. They get taught something quite different than that. They get shown that for 1,000 examples why, well, that may not be quite the case. Number one, it is a nature versus mind argument. You may feel different, but nature prescribes male and female. And I don't have to get into all the logistics of how we know that, but we know that. There are some days where I wish I wasn't Jacob Harris. Those days are few and far between. But there are days. But when I lay my head on the pillow at night, guess who I am? I'm me. And there's no getting out of it. And as much as my kids may wish for another dad every once in a while, they don't have another one. We know this about everything in our world, that once you are in something, you're in something. You're there. And just because we feel differently about it doesn't mean that it is the reality. Biology shows us there is male and there is female. Now, everybody wants to have a discussion, and we're not going to sit here and talk about this because we just simply don't have the time to talk about it and talk about every ins and outs of it. But everybody wants to talk about, well, what about the intersex? Those that sometimes do get formed differently. Guess what? Even in those, there are still male and female. There's no other conglomeration that they come to, either male or female. There are 2 chromosomes. That's it. And we have been trying to reshape that through our minds, but not trying to reshape it through biology because we can't. We've tried, and we can't. People have been trying to shift their minds for decades. But nature and biology hasn't changed. You're going to hear this a lot. Sex is different than gender. Says who? Because if we were to just take a scientific study, we would argue, based on results, they're the same. Gender is in the mind, they'll say. Therefore, I can be a different gender. Sex, however, is, it's a silly argument. It's a silly discussion to begin with. They equate and equal the very same thing. Folks, you are going to have people tell you that they are different. Please, when they tell that, say, please show me evidence that they are different. And they can't. They will say, well, this person feels, I can't go based off of a person's feelings for the truth. I have to go based upon evidence. And the evidence that we have is male and female. Not just biologically. Look at Genesis chapter 1. Verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed, it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. It is not coincidence that in the garden from the very beginning that God created male and female. That's not just thrown in there for us to, well, the point of the passage is, I get the point of the passage. From the very beginning, God created male and female. And we don't prescribe nor try to describe anything other than that. When we try to step outside of the realm of what God created, we are asking for problems. Because we are asking for us to be higher than that of God. And that won't work. And by the way, it hasn't been working. Folks, did you know that sex change surgeries, hormone therapy, is not shown in any evidence whatsoever to legitimately better people's lives? It hasn't. There's a gentleman by the name of Walt Heyer. Walt Heyer. If you have time, go to his website. It is called sexchangeregret.org. And he has a full website, article after article, person after person interview. People are constantly emailing him and sending in subscriptions to him about the fact that they had a sex change at some point in their life and they later came to regret it. I don't want you to think that people that have sex reassignment surgery regret it after a month, because not everybody does. I'm not saying that everybody regrets it after a year or 5 years or 10 years. Walt Heyer was a trans-sex man into a woman. For 8 years back in the 80s, he lived as a woman. And then in 1991, he detransitioned. And he got counseling to be able to get out of that. And he later came to realize, guess why he transitioned? Because when he was 4 years old, his grandmother started dressing him in girls' clothes. And she thought that he was prettier in girls' clothes. And then, at that very young age as well, he ended up being sexually assaulted by his uncle. And he later on came to realize, this is not what I wanted for my life. He regretted going through that transition. And the reason why he did is because he hated himself and hated the way that he was as a child. And his grandmother let him believe that he was in the wrong body. And he admits that in all his writings. And people are constantly writing him about their experiences of transition from gender to gender, and that they come later on to say, I was just confused at that time. I didn't want to be the other gender. Get this. This is a quote from somebody that wrote him. I transitioned to female beginning in my late teens and changed my name in the early 20s, over 10 years ago. But it wasn't right for me. I felt only discontent now in the female role. I was told that my transgender feelings were permanent, immutable, physically deep-seated in my brain, and could never change. He was told that he would always want to be the opposite gender, and that the only way I would ever find peace was to become female. The problem is, I stopped having those feelings. When I began seeing a psychiatrist a few years ago to help overcome some childhood trauma issues, my depression and my anxiety began to go away, as did my transgender feelings. 2 years ago, I began contemplating going back to my birth gender, and it feels right to do so. I want to be male. Folks, you watch media just like I do. They don't talk about that very much. They talk about how you're uncomfortable in your body now, but they don't talk about how people regret it years later. Do you know how many stories you can go find online? No joke. Of people who initially wanted to transition, or were convinced, more like, that they needed to transition. And they did, and perhaps even 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, they came back to gratefully regret it. Do you know how many stories there are, ladies, that went through hormone therapy, sex change surgery, and before they knew it, 10 years later, they said, that was just a phase I was going through. I don't know why I wanted that. And they're infertile and can no longer have children. It's too late. It's too late by then. Did you know that the suicide rate drop among transgender folk doesn't go down? Their problems don't go away. It's not a solution. And did you know, among those who even have feelings that they may be in the wrong body, did you know that the suicide rate is that of 25 times higher than those without those feelings? And even after they transition, it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. We have seen the harmful effects of these type of surgeries and hormone therapy, puberty blockers for children, where things are not okay with their bodies. Get this, and I'm going to butcher this name. Dr. Rittakurtu Kaltalia. She's Norwegian. She was the chief adolescent psychiatrist at she was Finnish, Tampere University Hospital, who was tasked with establishing the first pediatric gender clinic in 2011. She was tasked starting the very first one. And here's what she came to understand about gender change, especially that among children, gender-affirming care. That it is dangerous and provides no benefit. Did you know that a lot of European countries are closing down their gender clinics? Especially for that of children, because it's not working. They have 13-year-olds coming to them who say, I've got problems, and they say, oh, I know what your problem is. You're in the wrong body. And then they go through hormone therapy and puberty blockers, and then they come out of the other side having all the same problems. It's because that wasn't the problem. And we're just now starting to see that. The United States, frankly, is behind on a lot of this research because we didn't start as forward as other European countries did. It is harmful for them to go through this. Did you know that the majority of transgender people, in fact, studies show somewhere between 60 to 70%, have at least one other psychiatric disorder? Many think transgenders, this is a quote from Walt Heyer, many think transgenders are homosexual and that changing genders is all about sexual relations. And it's not the case. Every single one of them that has written to Walt Heyer had unwanted pain caused by sexual abuse, trauma, mental disorders, loss in their life, or terrible family circumstances. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. But you and I both know what this movement, what age they're targeting. And they're targeting the 13-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 11-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 9-year-old, the 8-year-old, and all the way up till 18, 20, 21, you name it. They're targeting them because they're the most susceptible, who don't know what kind of decision they're even making. Folks, we live in a society where care is more concerned about this than they are about this. And that's just the reality of it. No matter what the effects are, we're not really concerned. What are the long-term effects of puberty blockers? What are the long-term effects of hormone therapy? We're just now beginning to understand it. And the results are coming back terrible. Folks, we live in a society now that is ready to pick an answer before we know the problem. And it's because it's the wave of the future. Shame on us. Absolutely shame on us. Secondly, why is this so prevalent? Why has this become the wave of the future? Well, number one, literally, we have gender clinics popping up everywhere. It's becoming popular because we're making it popular. We have run into this age of what they call gender affirmation care, where if you go to your local psychiatrist, you go to your local psychologist, you go to your local doctor, and a 13-year-old girl is saying, I don't really feel comfortable in my body, is saying, well, that's because you've worn baggy jeans your whole life, you must be a boy. How silly is that? But that's what we do. We don't actually care about mental health issues that do actually pop up and things that we actually do need to deal with. We are more concerned about getting through our political stance. And they're doing this by the droves. Did you know that within the last 10, 20 years, 15 years, the number of young ladies from the ages of about 13 to 18, somewhere in that range, that the numbers of those proclaiming that they had gender dysphoria, that they really didn't know their gender, and they were trying to figure it out, the number of those cases has spiked by about 4,000%. And it's all due to gender affirmation care, and the next one that we're going to talk about, social media. I don't know if you know this. I know that you know this, but I don't know if you know this. But your 13-year-old daughter, your 13-year-old granddaughter, your 13-year-old great-granddaughter is not comfortable in their body. Who is at 13? Who is? I'll give you my 13-year-old experience. My pits stink. What's going on? That was my 13-year-old experience. What is this armpit hair doing here? It's new. Hormones are raging, and you don't know what to do with it. They're being sent to doctors in their fields of study and being told, you don't really belong in yours. That's why you don't like your body. And by the way, there are some people who go throughout their life never liking their body. Right? It doesn't mean that you're the opposite gender. It doesn't mean that your brain is wired to be the opposite gender, and it sure doesn't mean that your biology is the other gender. Folks, do you know how susceptible your 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old in your life is to everybody on their phone for that what they say is true? Mom and dad are out of date. You don't know because you grew up in the 80s or the 90s. I know. All of my friends listen to this person, and they claim to be whatever gender, and that goes a long way. I do literally blame social media for this epidemic. Because if you didn't have, put yourself back at your 13-year-old self, when we didn't have the form of everything being whomped on us at once, you didn't know what was going on in California. You didn't know what was going on, frankly, in the state next to you. If everybody in your household is against you, all I've got to do is scroll for about 20 minutes to find 100 people that agree with me. And do you know how easily even those of us that aren't 13 anymore get sucked into that? Folks, there are still people who get sucked into that notion. And they're 113. Let alone when you're 13. Did you know that the rapid rate of rise among LGBTQ community people, among the age ranges, among millennials, it's like 10 to 15%, and among Gen Z, the new generation coming up in their teenage years as we speak, is shooting up to about anywhere from 30 to 40%. Why? Because they're the ones who are susceptible to it. They're the ones who are susceptible to it. Folks, you are not cool if you go to your local high school and tell everybody that you don't think that a boy can be a girl and that a girl can be a boy. If you ask your daughter or your son or your granddaughter or your grandson to go and say that, they will be smited and shunned, because that's what keeps you in the know and in the how. It is being affirmed that boys can be girls and girls can be boys. And everybody else is saying it. I don't know if you remember how susceptible you were to everybody else when you were 15. You were. Because if I were to sit down and have a conversation with you about what you did when you were 15, I can guarantee a lot of people got in trouble because somebody else told you, let's do this. I've got those stories too. People are taking their children to doctors and not understanding anything about the movement and not understanding the political goal behind the movement. And they're striking at the core of insecurities of the youth. Of insecurities of the youth. Part of the reason why I'm preaching this is simply because I just want you to be informed that this stuff is crazy. I mean, it's just crazy. And we have this wave movement coming in, where apparently, for you folks that are older, you've been in the wrong body your whole life. We're now just realizing that your grandkids now have the opportunity to be in the right body. How nuts does that sound? Because it's nuts. Because it's absolutely, unequivocally nuts. Do you know how many 13-year-olds have anxiety? Do you know how many 13-year-olds are dealing with depression? That's called puberty. That's called life at that stage. They don't need to change. They need to just weather it out. By the way, did you know that 80% of people between the ages of 12 to 13 at some point in time say that they're insecure in their body and that they might need to transition, and then by the age of 18, 80% say that was silly. 80% say that was silly and I don't know what I was thinking at the time. Childhood is all about change. When I was a kid, I thought I was a superhero. It's all about change. Now I read about them, but my back says otherwise. Right? Life changes. Elements change. Places change. Mind changes. What you wanted to be when you were 13 is not what you want to be now. I wanted to be a bull rider. I don't want to do that anymore. See, those guys get beaten up all the time. Doesn't sound like as much fun. But that's who it's targeting. That is who it is targeting. Lastly, what can we do about it? Number one, be informed. As a parent, as a grandparent, as a great-grandparent. Be informed. Know that their phone will cause them to think crazy things. Know that one of their most susceptible areas in their life is, I don't feel good about my body. That's normal. None of us did. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you need to be another gender. If your girl dresses like a tomboy, let her dress as a tomboy. That doesn't mean she's a boy. And if the boy wants to wear a princess tiara when he's 13, guaranteed he's not going to go to college and wear his princess tiara anymore. He's going to get beat up if he does that. That's the reality of it. You grow out of it. It's just a phase. Be informed that they are attacking children. Be informed that there are probably some underlying factors why they're feeling that way. know that typically people who do deal with gender dysphoria, they feel like they're in the wrong body, well, it's usually accompanied by things like anxiety and depression, sexual trauma. It's usually accompanied by one of those things. We don't talk about that because we want to push the agenda that we want to push. But it's true. It's the reality. Number 2, don't give in to the lie. Nature is nature, mind is mind. Biology is not the way you feel. It's just not. Biology is not consistent with how I'm feeling today. I wish I had superpowers. My biology says otherwise. And no matter how many times I get up and try to jump off the chair, I'm going to fall every time. Truth is truth. Don't let them try and sway you. Because, well, what about this situation? What about this? What about the person who really doesn't feel right in their body? Truth is truth. Truth is truth. Morality is morality, and it doesn't get bent. Folks, I know that you have personal people in your lives that either want to transition or have transitioned. Truth is truth. No matter what they come out as, truth is truth. God created us male and female. Truth is truth. If God said something different in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 through 30, those are the genders and the sex that we would have. But he didn't. He said male and he said female. Love doesn't mean it's okay. We talked about this. Love does not mean you approve. Make that clear in your life. Love does not mean that you have to stand by and accept and encourage them. That doesn't mean that. Love means you be truthful. Love does mean you be kind and compassionate. Love doesn't mean that you kick them out the door and say, I'm never talking to you again, see ya. But love doesn't mean accepting the lie. And love doesn't mean affirmation. And it never will. Lastly, and I think this is the biggest thing that you and I can possibly do, pray about it. Pray about it. I know that we've got an upcoming local and global election, basically. Do you know what your number one thing that you can go home and do about it today is? Pray about it. Pray about it. Because God is a lot more powerful than I am. God is a lot more powerful than we are. God is a lot more powerful to influence our world and our society. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do something about it, but we need to be seeking God through all of it. Lastly, look at Matthew chapter 7. Verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them may be compared to a wise man who built his house upon the rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and burst against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded upon the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act upon them will be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and burst against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. The one who is not willing to put their foundation upon Christ will fall. Any ideology, any substance, any matter, any form, any person who puts their foundation on something other than Christ is concerned more about identity politics than they are about serving Christ is going to fall. It will fall. Because it doesn't stand up to Christ. It doesn't serve. It isn't loving. It isn't compassionate. It isn't forgiving. It isn't Christ. Any other foundation. Now, I know this was a fun subject to discuss. Very fun. Next week will also be a fun subject to discuss. I want to encourage anybody and everybody to come out, because next week we'll be discussing abortion. Next week is our sermon on that. Hot topic, obviously. Folks, I want you to know how important this is, and that's why I talk about it. Because it is anti-God, it is anti-morality, and it is anti-Christ. It doesn't stand upon his foundation. It doesn't stand upon the foundation. And I care about the world that my kids will grow up in. I care about that. That's why I talk about it. And I know sometimes those are difficult subjects, and you have people in your life that struggle with this and that perhaps are going through it. I'm not asking you to be perfect in it. I'm not asking us to have every right answer. I don't have every right answer. But I do know what the truth is. I do know what the truth is. There is male and there is female, and we need to stick there, because that's the way our Creator made us. And I want to stick there, and I want to teach you that we can stick there. That you and I together can fight it, and we can fight it through God. We can fight it through God. Folks, if you have a decision to make this morning that you want to give your life over to Christ, it's not about how I identify, it is about Christ and his identity. I want to identify with Christ. I don't want you to look at me and see Jacob. I don't need to transition. The only thing that I need to do, if there's any transitioning that's going to be going on, it will be transition into Christ. That's it. Because that's exactly what the Scriptures tell us to be concerned about. It's exactly what the Bible asks us to do. And we're going to do that here this morning together. Won't you stand and join me as we sing our hymn of worship?